Oh my gosh. Is it technical? Oh, hang on. Technical issue here with the microphone. All right, everybody, welcome to Audit Committee today. It's a very exciting Friday, sunny, International Women's Day. Got our lovely International Women Female Auditor General over there. All right, so we are ready to go. Let me start with my French. Bonjour à tous. That's it for today for my French. Happy Friday and welcome to this morning's Audit Committee meeting. I'll give you a quick run through of our agenda this morning. For our first item, we will welcome staff from KPMG. We're so happy to have a star-studded cast. We'll talk about them in a minute. Who will provide a presentation on their 2023 audit plan. This item is to be received, and we recommend that council consider and approve the report. The second item will be the audit of affordable housing. Our Auditor General, Natalie Goujon, will introduce the item, and Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein will follow with a 10-minute presentation. Following the presentation, the OAG will take questions from committee members and then any other members of council that are present. Following that, you'll be able to ask staff questions as well. For staff who are participating via Zoom, if you are answering a question, if you can please turn your camera on, that would be super helpful. We'll then vote on receiving the item and sending recommendations forward to council. Our third item is the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein will provide a 10-minute presentation on this item. The City Manager, Wendy Stephenson, will then deliver a 5 to 10-minute presentation in response to a motion from Vice Chair Brown, who was seeking a summary of our still outstanding audit recommendations. The OAG and City Manager will take questions following the presentations, and then we'll go to questions for staff. We would then vote on receiving the report and recommend council adoption. Our fourth item is the 2023 report on the fraud and waste hotline. Audit Principal Sarah Parr will provide an approximately 10-minute presentation. The OAG will take questions following the presentation, and then we'll go to questions for staff after that. Again, we'll then vote on receiving the item and sending recommendations forward to council. And finally, our fifth item will be on the 2023 annual report. Auditor General Natalie Goujon will provide an approximately 10-minute presentation. Following the presentation, committee members can ask questions to the Office of the Auditor General. If there are other members of council present, you may ask questions of the Auditor General following committee members. We will then take questions for staff. We'll then vote on receiving the item and sending recommendations forward to council. And that will be that. So let's get started. Before we proceed, I will ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
I see you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Carr.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Vice Chair Brown.
Here.
Chair Curry.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you very much, Melanie. All right, so the item we have to look at next is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I haven't received any. Not that we're not interested.
I'm interested in you speaking.
We're very interested. We just have no declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes. 3.1 Audit Committee minutes for November 27th, 2023, and Audit Committee confidential minutes for November 27th, 2023. Are the minutes noted on the agenda confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. Finance and Corporate Services Department. We have our item, the 2023 KPMG Financial Statement Audit Plan. The presentation will be by Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer, and then representing KPMG, Andrew Newman presenting, Rebecca Profit presenting, Kevin Travers, and Jonathan Jeannereau. Now, I want to just say one thing. Our audit partners from KPMG, one of whom I've worked with in the past, are highly, highly qualified, have incredible municipal experience, experience with many public sector institutions, including that they do the audit for the City of Toronto. So I've asked them already, if you have questions that you would ask them, you want to ask them that would get at that expertise. If you have questions from their various experiences in terms of their municipal experience, one of the partners, Kevin, is the lead municipality auditors. So these are people who have tremendous experience in auditing entities like ours. So they are happy, as they've told me, to answer any additional questions. So without further ado, we are on item 4. You'll come up Thank you very much. There should be 3 spots there. So, and Isabel, am I going to you first? No. Okay, fine. I'm going to you, Andrew or Rebecca first. Yeah, you have to keep the red light going there, Andrew. Yeah, that's
Okay,
the good
there
thing.
we go.
Super.
Oh, wow. That is loud. Through you, Madam Chair, and thank you for those kind words. But thank you to this committee and management, certainly for your faith in appointing KPMG as your external auditors. We are very excited to start with you and build a new, albeit independent, relationship with the city staff and with this committee. I'll flip it to one more page so the people on screen can see the pictures as well. So I wanted to introduce you to our team. So I am Andrew Newman. I am the office managing partner for KPMG in Ottawa. For 20 some years, I was the leader of our local not-for-profit and government practice. And of interest to the city and this committee should be I was a member and vice chair of the Public Sector Accounting Board, which sets the accounting standards that the city reports under for 12 years, ending in 2020. To my right is Rebecca Profit, who is a new partner and has succeeded me as leader of our not-for-profit and government practice. And Rebecca will be keenly involved in this audit. She brings municipal experience from the city of Kingston and actually moved up to Ottawa about 6 years ago to work in this space. And she will do most of the presentation, not just because it's International Women's Day, but quite frankly, because she's that good. And to my left, is Kevin Travers. And when we did our proposal, we committed that Kevin would have an active role in the audit, given his vast experience in auditing cities and currently as the auditor of the city of Toronto. So Rebecca is going to give a very short presentation, Chair, so that the committee can have appropriate time to ask any of all questions to us, but particularly to Kevin to take advantage of his experience, because that is what we offered in the in the RFP process. The audit has started already. Don't worry, we're not waiting for this approval to start. It has been great to build and renew relationships with Isabel, Luke. Our IT audit team has been highly involved with your IT department, getting that work done. And it's gone quite well for a first time audit. There's always kinks to work out and who to ask what to, but that is happening. And I certainly want to commend Isabel and in particular Luke for their patience and helping us work through those kinks. And as part of I'm getting to know the city and understanding the operations of it, and I'll warn the people mostly to my left, we will be coming to visit all of the general managers to learn about their areas of authority and operations, for short interviews. And with that, I'll pass it to Rebecca.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and represent KPMG on our first year as external auditors for the City of Ottawa. If we can continue to the next slide, please. I'll speak to the highlights this morning with our time together. We have subsequent slides, which we can certainly toggle to if there are further questions, but I'll focus on the highlights presented before you. Our materiality for the year is set at $110 million for the consolidated financial statements and $80 million for the city proper. This is based on 2% of your total prior year revenues and will be the foundation with which we feel would impact users of your financial statements in making decisions. When we consider the involvement of others in our audit strategy, we'll rely on management specialists, those being Mercer for their employee future benefits, Normand and Beaudry for their legacy employee future benefits, and Dillon Consulting for their environmental science and engineering reports, which provide the valuations for your land closure and post-closure liabilities and contaminated sites. Within KPMG and the faces on the previous slide, we'll work with our specialists in areas of IT audit who are looking at the environment and application controls. And as Andrew had mentioned, their testing is underway in terms of understanding and testing the control environment. Our risk team has been looking at your key business processes and the controls, as well as the overarching entity level controls at the city. And our actuarial specialist will look at that reporting from Mercer and Normand and Beaudry to assess the reasonability of the assumptions that they're using when it comes to your employee future benefits, WSIB, retirement and sick leave benefit obligations as well. In terms of the current year considerations, there are 2 new accounting standards that the city will be contemplating this year through the presentation of their financial statements. The first being around asset retirement obligations. So management has had a significant undertaking underway the past few years to value those asset retirement obligations and provide that audit trail for external auditors to follow in terms of adopting this new standard. So correlating the underlying data inputs, the assumptions and the modeling that will go into valuing your asset retirement obligation. And the second being financial instruments, which management has well in hand based on our preliminary planning discussions. In terms of the group audit strategy, as you see before you, our scoping was based on financially significant components based on both total assets or total revenues. And there are other components that are audited and have their own individual statutory reporting requirements that don't necessarily scope in terms of your group consolidated financial statements. So for the purpose of our audit over the group financial statements, those significant components will be the City of Ottawa proper, the transport services, and Hydro Ottawa. And all of these are audited by KPMG here in Ottawa, so there will not be an involvement of any other external auditors. Our coverage will give us 98% of your total assets and 77% of your total revenues on your consolidated financial statements with that approach. With respect to independence, nothing significant to highlight here. This is certainly the value that we bring as your external auditors. And should there be any matters to raise, we would certainly raise those early through management and yourselves to be addressed. On the right-hand side, we do highlight 3 significant risks. The first being the presumed risk of management override of controls. This is a Canadian auditing standard. It's not unique to the City of Ottawa by any means, and it simply recognizes that management is in a unique position when it comes to preparing the books and records of the financial statements. So we'll address this standard through our standard procedures. The second significant risk is around the consolidation process. So recognizing the complex organizational structure of the city and the manual processes that are involved in the preparation of the financial statements. The third risk is around the presumed risk of fraudulent revenue recognition. So this is a presumed risk of fraud under Canadian auditing standards. And so we will perform procedures to address the risk that there may be overstatement of revenues through manual journal entries or other adjustments when we looked at deferred revenues, including the obligatory amounts. And lastly, the other areas of focus that you see there are certainly detailed well within our audit plan as well as their risk rating, but do not rise to the level of a significant risk in terms of our audit approach. And lastly, our timeline. Upon appointment in the fall, our audit planning commenced. We've been working through our risk assessment and intern procedures throughout the winter, involving the IT and control testing as mentioned, and we'll commence our year-end fieldwork shortly in April and be prepared to be back before this committee in June with our audit findings report. And so before I pause to take on any questions from our plan or questions of KPMG in general with our municipal experience, again, I just want to thank Isabel and Luke and their team for working and collaborating with us through this auditor transition year and setting us up for success as we head into the year-end audit period. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, this transition year is always a unique one for sure. All right, audit committee members. Who has any questions? You're just blown away. You've nothing to ask. I have a question to ask. That question is the asset retirement obligation, that new concept. You said that our staff already have, a clear understanding of what that means. But can you explain to councillors what that actually means for us to be aware of? What that means as a city?
So management has been working actually with our accounting advisory practice at KPMG in terms of understanding the reporting requirements and calculating that asset retirement obligation. So we will work with management to look at the underlying data that has gone into that calculation, as well as the methodology that was applied and the actual accuracy of that calculation. And then you will see that within the financial statements that will be issued for this year.
Okay, just maybe to be more clear. So what does that mean? That now we have to pay attention to our asset retirement plan? Like, what does that actually mean for us?
I'll jump in on that to you, Madam Chair, just to give the overall clarity as to what the standard's going to require. It's going to require the city to look at all of their assets and determine where there is a legal obligation at the end of life, whether it's already fully depreciated or not, determine if there's a legal obligation to incur costs upon retirement, to book that obligation now in your financial statements and going forward.
Okay, and this is a rather new thing for municipalities. And
Yes.
it comes into effect when?
Right now.
Right now for this particular audit. Okay. Committee members have any other questions? I was going to ask, are there any differences you're seeing already between us and the city of Toronto?
To you, Madam Chair, that's obviously a great question. What I would say is, what's funny is that there's obviously a lot of similarities, right? So I think, and when it comes to risks, I mean, the risk profile here is very similar to the risk profile you would have seen when we presented our audit plan to the city of Toronto. There's always nuances, and there's nuances because of things that happen, whether it be related to the size of a program, the age of a program, the infrastructure, the systems that support it. But really, again, the themes look very, very similar.
Okay. Well, if you think there's anything we can learn, we would love to know that.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. And by the way, I'm sure they would feel the same.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're very excited to be working with you given the caliber of all of your experience. It's pretty special. So, seeing no further questions, I don't see any other hands up. What we have to do is receive this item. So, well, actually, can I just ask committee members, do you have any questions for staff on this? Wasn't very clear that we could switch over to staff. No? Okay, so then we are just going to receive this. Is this item received?
Received.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good luck with all your work ahead. Hope it's lots of fun. All right, Office of the Auditor General, you are up next. Okay, so we are now on to the audit of affordable housing.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the Audit Committee. So as Councillor Curry just mentioned, the first report that we would like to present to you today is the audit of affordable housing. I'd first like to take a moment to thank management as well as staff, especially those within housing services, for all of their collaboration throughout the course of this audit. We'd also really just like to acknowledge the importance of their work, and also that there were many competing priorities during this audit. So we thank them very much for their collaboration. I'll now like to pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein, as well as Senior Auditor Corey Richardson, who will walk you through the results of this audit. Merci. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning. Housing affordability has become a critical issue across many Canadian cities, including the City of Ottawa. In January 2020, City Council declared a housing emergency due to the increased and prolonged waitlist for affordable housing and the overcrowding of emergency shelters. Given the state of affordable housing across the country, there's a significant focus and effort at all three levels of government. Under the Housing Services Act of 2011, municipal service managers, in this case the city, are required to develop and implement 10-year housing and homelessness plans. The city's 10-year plan was most recently updated in July 2020. This revision identified the goal of creating 5,700 to 8,500 affordable housing options, which are new units and housing subsidies, between 2021 and 2030. This includes 500 new affordable housing units per year as outlined in the long-range financial plan. The plan, including its targets and the associated financial estimates, were based on pre-pandemic assumptions. Economic forces have affected material, fuel, labor, and financing costs. In addition, new provincial and federal legislation continue to impact the processes involved in approving affordable housing developments. Such changes in many of the factors used to develop the plan have resulted in a requirement for a review. The next refresh of the plan is scheduled to be released in 2025. As part of the federal government's Housing Accelerator Fund program, we understand that the city was recently approved for $176.3 million in funding to deliver up to 4,450 new homes over the next 3 years. While not exclusively focused on affordable housing, initiatives include providing capital funding for projects, streamlining the development pipeline, and offering financial incentives for below-market developments. Further initiatives include reducing barriers to increased density, as well as streamlining approvals for zoning bylaw amendments, site plan controls, and development reviews. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to assess whether the city has designed and implemented programs and structures to support its affordable housing objectives as outlined in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. Given the ongoing change in the industry, we focus on providing assurance that the policies, tools, and structures within the control of the municipality are in place to support programs aimed at increasing the development of new affordable housing units. The scope of our audit work ended as of July 30th, 2023. The scope of this audit did not include city activities or programs related to homelessness, emergency shelters, or the administration of supportive housing, social housing, or housing subsidies. Furthermore, the Social Housing Registry of Ottawa and the administration of the centralized waiting list were also outside of the audit scope. Some of these areas have been included in the scope of past audits and/or are planned for future audits. So just to pause here for a second, when we started this audit, we recognized the amount of change going on and facing this portfolio. The plan and the financial plan were outdated and due to be updated. There were changes coming to legislation and new programs and funding being introduced by other levels of government. We felt that the best way for our audit to add value was to provide assurance that the city has the infrastructure and programs to be successful towards the expected outcomes relative to affordable housing. I will now pass the presentation over to Senior Auditor Corey Richardson to present our audit observations. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Joanne. So now we'll go to the findings. The first finding is related to the oversight and governance of the affordable housing portfolio. So affordable housing development requires collaboration across the city. While there is collaboration between the key affordable housing stakeholders, there's currently no cross-functional oversight body that has the authority to prioritize or expedite affordable housing projects. Nonprofit and private affordable housing developers have expressed that the current process and involvement with multiple departments can result in slowdowns and ultimately increased costs. Second finding relates to opportunities to expand and track the use of the tools, incentives, and programs used to facilitate affordable housing developments. This includes streamlining the application process as well as broadening the scope of existing programs to allow for increased flexibility on conditions such as parking minimums, story maximums, and setback requirements. Additionally, there's currently no centralized view of all affordable housing projects and what tools are being leveraged or feedback on effectiveness being centrally tracked. Ultimately, if programs and tools are underutilized, fewer developers would be incentivized to build affordable projects, and without a centralized view, the city could be less equipped to support development partners. Go to the next slide, please. So the third finding relates to the city's land strategy for affordable housing. So land is a critical element to affordable developments. Typically, a developer to make an affordable housing project financially feasible, land must be granted at a deep discount or nominal value. While the city has an affordable housing land and funding policy in place, there is currently no formalized overall land strategy for affordable housing at the city. The city and Build Ottawa, which was previously known as the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation, each have revenue generation targets associated with the sale of surplus land. So this goal inherently conflicts with making land available to affordable housing developers at lower than market prices. Additionally, criteria that could rank suitability of surplus land for affordable housing developments are not yet in place. Finally, while all city-owned lands are looked at with strategic lens, other surplus lands across the city, such as properties owned by other levels of government or private stakeholders, are not evaluated for suitability or acquisition for affordable housing. So without a fully implemented strategy for identification, evaluation, and prioritization of land affordable housing developments, opportunities could be missed. So our fourth finding relates to the opportunities to review the scope of the affordable housing land and funding policy. So the policy requires that 25% of net proceeds of surplus property sales be transferred to the Housing Reserve Fund. This fund is specifically for the development of new affordable housing. So currently, only sales on land deemed appropriate for residential development are contributing to the fund. This has resulted in an average of 9.4% of total sales from all city and build Ottawa going to the fund from 2018 through 2022, which equates to $5.9 million. If 25% of sales on all city-owned land were allocated to the fund in this time period, an additional 9.8 million would have been transferred and available for housing development, affordable housing development. So funding is one of the key challenges for affordable housing development. Maximizing the scope of the affordable housing land and funding policy would increase funds available to be used towards the achievement of affordable housing goals. Go to the next slide, please. The fifth finding highlights that there are multiple definitions of affordable housing used by the city. So the city has multiple definitions of affordable housing, usually ranging from 30% of gross income up to the average market rent as defined by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Without a consistent definition of affordability, the reliability and consistency of monitoring and reporting is reduced, which can negatively affect decision-making. Inconsistent definitions can also create a confusion for stakeholders. So our last two findings relate to reporting on the progress against outcomes and key affordable housing indicators. So the primary mechanism for reporting on affordable housing targets is the annual 10-year housing and homelessness plan update. Currently, the annual update does not fully align with the commitments made on reporting of progress against targets. For example, there's no reporting on levels of affordability as committed to in the plan. Additionally, there's an opportunity to publish key affordable housing indicators more frequently in quarterly dashboards, with such information as the stage of approvals or construction, number of bedrooms and units, and geographical data. So to conclude, the city has not met its new affordable housing unit goals in recent years, primarily due to the funding levels from all levels of government and capacity issues in the housing development sector. However, the city does have structures, programs, and tools in place to progress this portfolio and has been responding to the continuous change being experienced in the market by reviewing and renewing strategies, plans, and approaches. 9 recommendations were made in this audit, and all were agreed to by management. So we'll go to the next slide and be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Before we just start on questions, there's a procedural motion that I will ask Vice Chair Brown to read, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the supporting documentation for item 5.1 titled Office of the Auditor General Audit of Affordable Housing was not circulated with the agenda package. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of these documents for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to section 89.3 of the Procedure Bylaw number 2022-410.
All righty. So including that, is that item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. All right. Questions? All right. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for the presentation. I will commend you on doing an audit on affordable housing when we have no definition of affordable housing. That must have been quite a feat. Indeed, it's recommendation 7 that recommends that we seek that. I'm wondering if when undertaking the audit, given that we didn't have that definition, if there was any thought, one of the biggest discrepancies that I find in affordable housing is that we have those different definitions. 30% of income for people living on OW or DSP is a significant difference in rent paid, whereas 80% of AMR, that's, you know, thousands of dollars in difference in rent. Was there any thought to, you know, putting together a recommendation on assessing that gap in affordability and really looking at studying, you know, who is this affordable for? Or I guess perhaps that couldn't be contemplated when we're missing that definition.
Thank you for the question. That you hit that on the head. It is very hard to have made an evaluation of that. We obviously recognize that the definition is a widespread and we when we did our work and spoke to management and obviously external stakeholders, that's the challenge around, it's in the province, you know, it's not unique to the city of Ottawa, and I think become the challenge. So I do know that as part of our discussion of recommendations, management is working with the province as well to sort of streamline and try to narrow this definition so that the focus can be on, okay, what are we doing for this particular affordability level and whether or not there needs to be adjustments. So it really wouldn't have been part of our scope, but we understand that and we felt that we had to talk about this definition. It was a key limitation here in the industry.
So I know your work plan is very, very full, but given that this is affordable housing is, you know, the greatest priority of council and all levels of government, I would say, well, not quite, but certainly stated that it is. Do you see potential audits in the future to really look at the fact that there is such a gap? I mean, we have people that are living in housing are paying a few $100s a month, and the definition of affordable that we use, that the provinces use, 80% of average market rate, could mean somebody living in a neighborhood of mine is paying, you know, $1,800 is considered an affordable rate. So do you see future audits that could be done to really tackle that discrepancy and that sort of missing level of affordability?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think there's a few ways we can capture some of that. Obviously, with all of our audits, we do follow-up procedures. So first and foremost, when management has addressed this recommendation, we'll come back to look at how they've defined it, and we usually kind of see how that's been communicated. So I think that's the first step in taking a look at that. You may also remember that on our audit plan for 2024, 2025, with a commencement actually in this year, is a housing and homelessness services audit. So there's other aspects where we will be coming back to looking at some of these elements. So it would also give us an opportunity to come back and see if there are other trickle-down effects from the definition. And we also make recommendations with regards to giving a little bit more information on what's affordable, what type of affordability when it comes to reporting. So I think all three of those aspects will help to address some of your concerns.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm hoping that housing and homelessness audit will, I know you wouldn't have scoped it yet, will also sort of address some of the more external factors. I mean, definitely this audit dealt with factors that are internal to the city and what we can do to improve governance and reporting. But I'm wondering in your dive of all the materials of affordable housing, you know, if you noted anything for the future that you can look at with respect to different levels of government and the administration, because one thing that came out very clear in the audit is that we're very siloed in terms of programs and how we deliver that. But I think, you know, that's largely a factor of how different governments deliver different programs. I mean, even the different funding that were provided. I mean, we had Rapid Housing Initiative, which helped develop really deeply affordable housing. And then there's the Housing Accelerator Fund. We get money from the province operationally. Like it's kind of all over the map. And I think that that's really what's happened, you know, in the city, how we deliver these siloed programs where we're missing huge gaps of people that we're providing it for. Did you see anything that, you know, recommendations that you thought of or could think about how different levels of government could work better together? I know that's way out of the scope of it, but I'd just be curious to understand, you know, from an auditor's point of view, if that was something that really stood out.
So the unfortunate situation is that our mandate only takes us to what is within the city's control. Other levels of government are obviously outside of our mandate, so we really can't speak to what they should or should not be doing. What we do highlight is obviously limitations. So we talk about, you know, in the context, we talk about, you know, a lack of funding. We do outline that that's funding from across the board. So we do know that that has an implication. And I look to Deputy Auditor General to see if she's got anything else to add, but it truly is outside of the scope of our mandate, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I understand it. I completely understand and know that. I see it as such a big hindrance when we don't have that that coordination between three levels of government in terms of determining what programs we need, where the gaps are. It just everybody works so independently, which I think is part of the reason why we've ended up with delivering an audit that speaks to how we deliver it in the city, is because that's how it's dealt with. So, but thank you.
And I'll just add one thing. I think, to credit of management, I think there's obviously an advocacy piece as well. So but we certainly saw that. And I think, both at the political level and at the bureaucratic level, like at the administrative level, we recognize that there's an advocacy piece.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And Councillor Carr, if you want to go back on for some more questions, I know you have lots. Before I go to Councillor Kavanagh, I just want to say for anybody watching this online, if you can't see in the audience here, but this affordable housing audit is obviously very important to audit, but you can see who's here in our audience from this perspective. We can see, and we have emergency and protective services here, Ottawa Community Housing. We have procurement, economic development, infrastructure services, OC Transpo, public works, parks and rec. I think we have every single city manager sitting in this room right now listening to this audit. If I've missed anybody, I'm sorry. But you can see how important an affordable housing audit is, because it touches every single department in the city, and its great importance is indicated by the presence of so many people here in the audience today. So thank you all for being here to listen and to listen to what councillors' questions and the answers are. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Auditor General, and to your team for doing this. This is a huge topic, and clearly it's front and center for our city. Recently, we had, at the Finance Committee, we had an update on economic development, and I just can't see economic development moving forward without affordable housing. And so this is very timely. I realize you wrote this before the announcement came for the federal housing. How do you see that fitting in? I'm concerned that we need efficiencies. Is that what we're looking for in terms of how we get that money out fast?
Thank you for your question. I think, well, you're correct. We knew we were working on the audit when the application process was happening and the projects were being proposed, but not obviously when the announcement of the funds came. But I think, while not specifically mentioned in the report, I think our belief is that the structures and the recommendations that we're making would apply to this. The idea is to absolutely gain efficiencies while keeping to the controls that exist, and allowing that's why, one of the recommendations was that oversight role. I wouldn't normally want to recommend an additional layer of bureaucracy, but because, as has already been pointed out, there are so many parties involved in a development application or a development process for affordable housing, to get all the people in the room together to expedite an application or approvals or whatever, was where we thought, and when talking to management, it could very much help. So we do believe that the controls and the recommendations that we're suggesting will apply to this new bundle of money.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And in terms of the governance structure being developed, you're talking about overseeing both planning and housing services. Is that correct? Our
recommendation would cover the various parties in the planning, as well as housing service to come together as needed to help prioritize and expedite these projects.
Thank you. As you know, I'm chair of Ottawa Community Housing, and this is a top priority for us. We want to get moving on using the funds and building for our city and working together with our partners. We're wholly owned by the city. I just trying to get my head around next steps, because housing isn't instant. It takes years to get from starting with shovels on the ground. And in terms of the process, where are you seeing that the most time saving would be in terms of possibilities from your view?
I might refer this to management for more detail, that they're closer to it.
I definitely will ask that to management.
But I will say that I think what we've learned from the audit is, as you said, to get to where you're putting shovels in the ground can take a long time. So, we did recognize in our report that the city has been giving money to sort of pre-development to allow for developers to get all those steps done and funded such that, there's a pipeline. And so when the funding is made available, they're like shovels can go in the ground fairly quickly, not instantaneously, but quickly. So that was one of the things that, helps expedite, but there's others.
Oh, I appreciate it. And in terms of just the housing indicators, we're looking at stats. I know that's going to be a big job. And I appreciate you trying to tackle the definition of affordable housing. I think we're all struggling with it at times when we, talk about it. One of the things that I find difficult is describing when, a development has affordable housing units versus nonprofit housing and how that's treated. I don't know if you looked at that. The CMHC definition versus, the traditional social housing definition.
We acknowledge that there are lots of definitions. We put examples of a few, but there are others. We know at the different levels of government, they're using different words as well. So a challenge across the boards, but so I recognize that.
Now I appreciate you looking at surplus land and how important that is and how we can make best use of it. In the case of Ottawa Community Housing, for example, we tend to have our own land and our own opportunities. I don't know if that puts us in a different category that should speed things up when we're in the process.
I probably want to ask management that question for sure. But again, we recognize the same thing and having it available absolutely for development expedites the process for sure.
Thank you. And I appreciate the fact that, with our 10-year housing and homelessness plan, what tends to get talked about, and I know you didn't do this in your audit, is the fact that we have to house people immediately. And that's transitional housing, which is in a totally different category. And that's part of the recognition. And I'm constantly explaining that to people myself, that's not housing. That's a place for people to sleep right now until we can get them permanent housing. So I know it's not covered in the audit, but how does that fit into just keeping track of where we are?
So that from what we've seen is quite a separate process, separate lists. Again, I would defer to management for more insights. However, we do have a homelessness audit plan. So these types of topics will definitely what we include in at least in our risk assessment.
Okay, so it all blend together. You're taking on a lot.
Yeah.
I'll stop there because I know my colleagues have questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did this audit take into consideration the zoning bylaw working group that's taking place right now to better consolidate the official plan to our zoning?
I'm trying to think. Thank you for the question. I believe we would have known about it and it was brought up. We didn't have a specific finding about it, but it was certainly brought up as part of the information we gathered.
Okay, thank you. When discussing how Ottawa has fallen short in its affordable housing goals in recent year, your report mentions the usual issues such as labor costs, skill shortages, interest rates and such, but you also attributed new provincial and federal legislation that impacts the processes involved in approving affordable housing developments. My understanding of the provincial legislation in particular is that it was designated to incentivize housing supply, not slow it down. Can you speak to the concerns that you have with that legislation?
Thank you for the question. I think the comments we were making, and this is really in the background section of our report, was really saying that the changes, so absolutely the legislative changes that we were seeing are aimed to shrink the process and the pressures to put actually to shrink those down. So what we were referencing is even the analysis and the work to be done to work on those reductions takes time and process. So we just wanted to flag that there's a transitional process here.
Once that transitional process is completed, is it your assessment that we're going to be more efficient?
That's the intention. That would be the intention.
Okay.
Yeah.
On page 4 of the report, you speak to the expectation in the LRFP of an increased revenue for affordable housing of $8.8 million from the VUT and land sales. Do you know what the percentage is or the breakdown between that $8.8 million figure in terms of generation from VUT versus land sales?
Thank you for the question. We have the breakdown, I think, for other years, but I would prefer to management for 2024.
Okay, I'll ask that question when it comes to that. Thank you. I think my last question for now, on page 12, when you speak to the opportunities to broaden the scope of the affordable housing and funding policy, you note that other smaller municipalities have higher rates of inclusion for the transfer of proceeds. However, increasing the inclusion rate would reduce the funds available for other purposes. Could you please speak to the consequences of increasing the inclusion rate and what other programs you believe would be impacted by a change in these funds?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. I think the first part is clarifying what that finding is. So I think there's a difference in interpretation of the policy in itself. So our review of the policy is that 25% of any sale of land should be going towards the either affordable housing units or the affordable housing reserve. Staff's interpretation is that is only for land deemed for residential purposes. I'm just ensuring that I got that correct. So that right there is a gap. We do highlight that through our discussions and review of other municipalities, some municipalities are providing more than 25%. I actually think some much smaller municipalities are actually putting 100%. We're not stating, it's not for us to state what percentage needs to be there. We are highlighting to committee and council, though, that there might be a difference in expectations. So if you were reading the policy the way we were reading the policy, there's a gap as to what's actually being applied right now. And as you all know, it is not up for my office to state how much funding should be provided to any particular priority of council. So we're highlighting it, and it's why we recommended that management do a cost benefit analysis to see the impacts of if they were to change their current application. Obviously, any funding that is currently not going within the reserve or directly to affordable housing units is being applied to other programs and services. I couldn't speak to how much and where. I think that's obviously management looks every year on an annual basis on the funds that they have, and they allocate based off of their needs. So any changes to the current application would have an impact on programs and services based on how they allocate funding.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Brown, your questions were just for staff? Okay, so I will go to Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. So in your first recommendation, it talks about the cross-functional oversight body and governance in general. And while some people will see this as, ooh, it's another layer of bureaucracy, it might not necessarily be a bad thing. I guess this depending on how it's executed, right? However, my question is, what about us in terms of the way that we're laid out? Right now, I think most affordable, like anything to do with affordable housing kind of goes to two committees. It goes to community services, it goes to planning and housing. Do you see any opportunities, or is that within your scope to kind of say if there are any opportunities to sort of consolidate that, improve how that is divided up, or how communication between the two committees happen?
Thank you for the question, actually, and I will see if Natalie has a comment about the authority. It wasn't a topic we focused on necessarily looking at sort of that more of an administrative piece, but I appreciate that there could be an opportunity to streamline, because there could be similar silos or missed opportunities. So I agree.
I would echo what Joanne just mentioned, and when in doubt, if we're able to streamline any processes to make the timeline go faster, as we mentioned, every delay costs more money, which means it's either the city needs to put more money into affordable housing to make it affordable, or it's costing more money for the developers to move forward with these. So while it wasn't an item that came out during our audit, I do not see any harm in actually taking a look at that. So I guess I look to management and to the clerk's office if that's something that they would be open to reviewing.
Okay, thanks. Like when we were new counselors, part of the governance review in that big chart we received was combining consolidating where the affordable housing functions go. So perhaps that's a question for staff later. Then, yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. That's the thing. I mean, that's what I said. You see every department in the city is here. You know, so does it go to every single committee or do we try to streamline it? Because going to every committee would take more time, but yet everyone's input is important, right? So absolutely, I think I agree that clerk's office can maybe think about that. How do you make sure that everyone is looking at this and then that it's not siloed? You know, it's kind of a difficult challenge, but it is important because of how many departments it touches. Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Lowe. And so now, Councillor DeRoche, before I go to questions for staff.
Thank you. Thank you, General, for the report. I think we're very good on the advocacy side, and there's a lot of attention on that. But I wonder on how well we do the administration of housing. And I think the report is starting to get into that area, and it talks about governance because it is really, I think, one of the few branches of the city that after amalgamation was not amalgamated. We have Ottawa Community Housing, we have Nepean Housing, we have Cumberland Housing, we have a lot of other housing providers who I think are probably doing a good job. But in the age of evidence-based policymaking and decision-making, I don't know if this is the most efficient. I don't know if we are maximizing the spaces that we currently have so that if a unit becomes available, are we making it available as quickly as possible? If someone is evicted for the right reasons, are we making that unit available? If someone is overhoused, how are we moving that person as efficiently, as quickly as possible so that we are maximizing the current stock that we currently have? And I just don't have that answer. So do you think that this new governance model will put us in that direction, that we as a council will have some clear picture in terms of efficiency of the administration of community housing? We have that with a ton of other branches of the city, but I don't think we have that right now with an important file, as I think we all agree. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I would agree with your comments. I think, there will be with the legislation and with the expectations of the other levels of government, again, management would be in a much better position to talk about this. There will be the need for all this to be looked at together in totality to really to deliver on what's being expected. So I agree. Just starting.
Thank you. Thank you. And I look, I guess I'll just tick off another vote, as Councillor Carr said, that I hope there will be additional reports that come forward that deal with what I would like to see is, again, efficiency of our operations, comparisons across, the organizations that we have right now to again ensure that we're not building bureaucracies. We want to build housing, not greater bureaucracy to administer a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor DeRoche. That's a big quote for the day. We're not building bureaucracies, we're building housing. Okay, now for questions to staff. So Councillor Brown, you kept your hand up. That was strategic. Vice Chair Brown, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of recommendation 1, it says that management will formalize this internal governance structure in Q1 of 2024, and we're going to be into Q2 2024 in 3 weeks. Is this going to be done in 3 weeks?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Actually, it has been done. We've developed an interdepartmental task force on affordable housing that has membership from the Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Office, from our Community and Social Services Department, from our Financial Services Group, and the city manager is also part of this group. So what we're doing is coming together to, as was mentioned in the report, respond to some of the feedback around the perception of silos, and really bring to light the level of partnership that does exist right now among the various departments. But specifically, the work plan will be focused on implementing the audit recommendations of once approved, if approved. Also, the implementation of the Housing Accelerator Fund, that program, as well as looking at the land strategy and funding strategy. and other policy and other issues that arise with a goal to achieving our not only affordable housing targets, but our overall housing targets. So we're very excited to have launched that task force, and thank you to the Auditor General for supporting that goal to establish a more concerted, collaborative, focused view to accelerating the building of housing in Ottawa.
Thank you very much for that. And how will this internal group be communicating to committee and council exactly what they've done to streamline this process to expedite the approval of affordable housing? So like I'm interested in the nuts and bolts of it. I want to know exactly the issue before and how you fixed it. So how is that going to be communicated to committee and council?
Thank you. So we're 2 meetings in and we're working out those nuts and bolts, Councillor, but there will be at the minimum quarterly memos to council as updates on the work of the task force.
Thank you very much. And in terms of recommendation 5 and the Auditor General touched on it, if we start applying the full 25% of funds that we could allocate and fulfill that that policy, there would be a financial implication with other programs and services. If we shift our definition and we start adhering to that policy, to that full percentage rate, can we absorb across the corporation that financial impact? So we're not cutting back on other important works, but we're contributing the maximum financial resource possible to this?
That would have to be as part of the budgeting process to identify where dollars would need to be shifted, but it would impact our overall budget and other citywide services.
All right, thank you very much. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Brown. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions for staff. I think probably this one is for Creo, not sure. One of the recommendations when we talk about the land strategy is to assess, not only assess city-owned property, but also assess federal lands. And I was wondering, just an opinion question, if that was something that Creo would see as valuable. And just from my own experience within my ward, over a year ago, the federal government said, we don't know what we're doing with 599 Tremblay, which was going to be an office complex. So the impact of that decision has been that there's no development of the 900 units at 430 Tremblay, which is a Canada Lands project, and we can't develop the private land that they sold off to CLB, which is 124 units, because it's all dependent on shared utilities. So the lack of decision-making by the federal government is effectively holding up thousands of units in my ward. It's not dissimilar from the fact that the Federal Study Center, 1495 Heron Road, was abandoned in 2012. Federal government paid over $1 million in maintenance of it for years. The application's now active with the city, but 12 years, an empty parcel of land that has the ability to house 800 people. Similarly, last year, the federal government delisted 10 buildings and everybody got really excited. This is going to be what solves the problem. I don't think anything's happened in a year. So I'm just wondering from Creo's assessment, is there any value in assessing federal lands, or is there any work towards working better with them to get some of these properties available?
Thank you for the question. So we do have a relationship with our counterparts at the federal level, and when we find out through them about lands that are being surplus, we do circulate them internally to see if there's a city use. One of the key elements, though, is the federal government typically wants to get market value for those lands, and so we will circulate. And then if someone puts up their hand, we'll usually ask, do we have a budget for it? And we can have conceptual discussions with the federal government, but until we have the money's in place to purchase the lands, the discussion can only go so far. I think I'd also add, just from recent discussions with them, and not to defend the federal process, but I think they have a lot of hoops that they jump through, my understanding, in terms of a hierarchy of who gets first dibs on the lands. And sometimes there might be other groups that are holding up those lands also.
Okay, so just to clarify, so the federal government has a lot of land in Ottawa, obviously, nation's capital, the epicenter of the federal public service, but they ask for market value for their lands. So even under programs like the Federal Lands Initiative, they're still expecting market value for all of those lands?
I can't say for all the lands, but when they do surplus lands, they are looking for market value. Just as when we're surplusing lands, we're looking for market value also.
Okay, excellent. My second question with respect to lands, I know there's you know, recommendations within the audit basically about making city-owned lands more available. And I know in my discussions with Clara's team, we talked about things such as an acquisition strategy, which, you know, has the potential to box us in because you're only allocating finances for acquisition. And we still can do acquisitions like we did in my ward recently of 1245 Kilbourne. Do we see any opportunity? I'd be curious, I guess this is probably more for Clara's team. What are the opportunities we see in making lands more available to non-for-profits? Like I know that we do it, for example, Capilano Drive, for Salis, I believe that was city-owned land that was made available. Do we see the opportunity for a more proactive process to dispose of lands? And I'll just use an example. I think there's a parking lot in the Glebe, I think 545. I don't have the address exactly right. You know, that it appears in our list of our pipeline. You know, is that, for example, something where we can put a sign on it and ask for not-for-profits to express interest and provide that land? Like, how do we really see that that we can better leverage our city-owned lands through some of these recommendations?
So just to start, so when we want to surplus lands, obviously we'll circulate those lands around all the different city departments to make sure there isn't a internal city use, because we certainly would not want to dispose of land and find out 6 months later, oh, we need that land for something else. And we always have an ongoing relationship with housing services to make them aware even before we do circulations. And one of the next steps for us is to revise our disposal policy to basically give a first right to housing on any land. So before we surplus them internally, we will officially surplus them to housing services so that there isn't a conflict between departments. Because of the great need for affordable housing, we would make them aware of it first. So I just wanted to give that step before all comments.
And if I may add, Chair, and from that process that Peter described, what we would do then is issue a request for proposal for nonprofit housing providers who would be interested in developing the land and building for affordable housing, of course.
How long does that internal disposition process take generally? Is it quick?
For the circulation, or I think we usually put 30 days on it.
Excellent. Can I ask one more question, Councillor Curry, and then move, or do you want to move now?
Sure, go ahead with one more, and I will just say the economic development staff, if you have a comment you would like to make now, because you think it would be helpful, you don't have a question coming right at you, but let me know.
So I guess my question likely is going to go to Clara's staff. You know, the whole thrust of the audit in terms of the fact that we're not meeting our targets of 500 affordable units per year. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to methodology in terms of how we're counting those units, because largely it's been completions, but we also have other ways that affordable housing is being created now within the city. And I know that the team has been working within my ward, for example, on the social contract with Herongate to declare certain units affordable as per the social contract. And as well, we're opportunities that have arisen, for example, with the land trust that have purchased, that we've helped facilitate a purchase of a building to keep it at a level of affordability that would likely be around 80% AMR. So it's not necessarily creating new units, but they are affordable units. So I'm wondering if you can speak to any changes in methodology in terms of how we'll be counting units. Are they just construction? Any comment on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We follow the guidelines or the recommendations in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. And what that looks to is delivering new units. So our targets within that plan from 2019 are to deliver 500 new units a year maximum. So what was identified, I guess, through the audit was how many completions have we achieved? In 2019, I think there were 270. It dropped, obviously, through the pandemic. Right now, we're slated to complete over 400. I think it's pretty close to 500 units this year, 475. There are another 425 that should be completed shortly thereafter. So things are really starting to pick up and move. We have 500 and some odd that are have some funding put toward them. We just need to top that funding up to get those rolling. And then we have thousands more in a pipeline, again, requiring funding. The other metrics you were speaking to were acquisitions through OCLT to maintain existing units, but we haven't in the past necessarily reported on retention acquisitions, but it's certainly something that we can start to identify in our regular reporting.
Yeah, I do find that interesting that there has been no attempt to capture that sort of retention, especially when we receive reports, from Steve Pomeroy that we're, for every unit we create, we lose, I think it's 31 now, it used to be 7. And, that naturally occurring affordable housing stock, whether through acquisitions, I do think it's, in some cases, the level of affordability are less than the new units we're creating at the new definitions of 80%, 90% of AMR. So I do see value in trying to capture what really is an affordable unit. I'll go off, but I might come back.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. Councillor Lowe?
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I don't know where this is going to go, but it's going to go to someone. I got a quote of the day too. So I know this is sort of just a recommendation right now, and we haven't, I don't imagine there's been any execution of creating that central, sorry, I got to scroll back up, the cross-functional oversight body or sort of that thing that sort of puts everything together. Have there been any, at least, let's say, early discussions about what that might look like? Is that like, are we going to hire another, $250,000 person, or are we going to sort of find somebody within who'll kind of function as that person as well, in addition to their regular role?
So Chair, as I mentioned earlier, we've established an interdepartmental oversight body that it has membership from the Planning, Real Estate, Economic Development Department, our Community and Social Services Department, the Finance Department, the City Manager's Office. We're really focused on advancing the Housing Accelerator Fund plans. Once the funding plan is approved by council, the audit recommendations, I'm implementing those audit recommendations. And it will also guide discussions and provide input into the 10-year housing and homelessness plan refresh. I think once we actually move forward in advancing the work of this oversight body, we will be able to come back to council with some recommendations on how to improve the internal systems that allow for speedier, more timely housing construction. So I would ask for some time to be able to actually activate on a new internal mechanism to actually break down those silos.
Okay, thanks very much. And my next question then is to go back on the other topic that I mentioned about our governance. Like I maybe for the clerk's office, either the interim clerk or the upcoming clerk. When we were at the beginning of the term, one of the discussion items in the governance review was indeed, do we sort of consolidate stuff into one, either all of it into planning and housing or all of it into community services when it comes to affordable housing? Depending on how much you can share, what was the feedback like on that item?
Madam Chair, as the member noted, there is an opportunity for council to review its governance structure, including the mandate of its standing committees twice per term, once at the beginning and once again at midterm. I can't speak specifically to the amount of feedback we had on that. Well, members were there for the council meeting in which that was discussed. The clerk's office will be administering the midterm governance review process this year, which will include consulting with all members of council and the mayor. Historically, decisions regarding the structure and mandate of the standing committees has been something driven by the consensus around the council table.
Yeah.
So you'll have an opportunity to give more feedback.
Yeah.
Now that you've read this audit and you see where we're at.
Yep. Okay, understood. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's a blend, and you're also dealing with the transitional housing, which is not what we're talking about today, but you've got your plate full, no doubt. And I really appreciate hearing that the task force is up and running. That's good news. What are you hearing from the providers of what steps can be removed to speed things up? Because we all know time is money, and the faster that projects can get moved on, the less expensive they are. And of course, we want those houses built. So what steps are you looking at removing?
Madam Chair, as Claire indicated, we'll be coming back with reports. We're looking at removing any zoning impediments for any sites in our housing pipeline. We're looking at a simplified, streamlined development review process to get affordable housing projects delivered as quickly as possible, stripping down some of our current requirements. So you'll see reports on those in the next couple months that will spell out those details as Clara indicated.
That's great. I really appreciate that. It's something that was already raised, is the loss of affordable housing. And we're aware that, it's not about building houses, it's about the housing that is no longer affordable. We're losing it. Are we looking at legislation, bylaws, whatever, on renoviction? Because that's something that's been raised where a lot of housing is lost and we just can't keep up with it in terms of building more.
So I'll start with that, and perhaps David may wish to add. So good question. We are, the province is currently looking at this issue right now. So we're kind of waiting to see what's in scope. The policy regarding rental housing protection was reinstated in our official plan with the Bill 150 changes. The minister removed some of those modifications. So our official plan has the enabling policy, but there's provincial activity. We're waiting, to see where they land on this, to see what's in scope at the municipal level.
I appreciate that. We do have a planning and housing committee now. So is it possible to get regular updates on where we are? So this is moving pretty fast. If you've got a task force already in play, is it possible to get regular updates at planning and housing, for example, to say where we are in terms of moving forward on affordable housing?
Yes, I think, thank you for the question. I think Claire indicated we'd look at quarterly updates. We currently provide updates quarterly on our housing units and approvals. So I think what we need to look at is, can we, combine some of those functions, expand our current reporting to include, those aspects you're looking for. So that will be coming.
One of the things I wonder about is, how long is it taking now for a typical large project to get through the stages of being accepted and approved? And what are our goals? What are we looking at timeline goals of efficiencies?
So that's, thank you for the question. That's, it really does vary on a site by site basis, but, our current Bill 109 goals for, a zoning change are 90 days, site plan 60 days. But it does vary significantly depending on the site. I can think of a recent OCH site where they, changed the secondary plan. There were a lot of policy changes that had to happen to respond to changing conditions on site. So there's no one simple answer, but what we are looking at is, fixing any zoning issues that are going to slow down or affect those, be proactive, work with our providers and our housing services group to get those in place so the sites will truly be shovel ready.
Are nonprofit or affordable housing projects going to be prioritized?
Yes, 100%. You've probably seen recent communication in terms of our planning services, internal structural changes where we've created a group to prioritize the review of affordable housing projects. I mentioned some streamlining process changes that will be coming back to you in the next couple months on. So yes, it will be priority number one.
Right. We could look at other cities such as Toronto, who's really pushing forward on that. Are we looking at those models?
Certainly, we're always looking at best practices. If you have, I'm not sure specifically what you're referring to in the Toronto situation. Is it from a review perspective, or is it from a housing delivery?
Affordable nonprofit housing.
Chair, can we get clarification on the models you're referring to?
They're looking at prioritizing and targeting more affordable housing, and they're looking at streamlining their processes as well. So are we looking at what's going on in other places like Toronto?
I'll ask Mr. Wise to speak to that.
Yeah, Councillor, and thank you, Chair, for the question. I think maybe if I could just be a little bit more specific in terms of the actions that we're doing, and Derek Moody can always jump in with a bit more detail if need be. But within PRED, within the development review system, we have set up a specific development review team that will be tasked with prioritizing these affordable housing projects as they move their way forward, as they are moving their way through the pipeline from housing services over to the development review and into implementation. So that is something that is now established, and that team is up and running. That team is also going to have carriage over the HSIP files. Those are the high social impact project files, of which files like OCH, et cetera, would be candidates for that. And the intent behind that is to provide a single face for these applications and for these nonprofit developers to be working with as they work their way through that service. Really, if you think about it, it's almost very much like an economic development. We talked about the high economic impact project. The high social impact project is really a concierge service to be able to take someone, an affordable house provider, and to be able to walk them through the difficulties of the process, link them properly with building code as they need to be, overcome policy challenges, et cetera, et cetera. That will be their task as they move their way forward. Derek, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in around anything else.
Only that from a prioritization perspective, the high social impact project or program already does prioritize the review of that. And I think, when we look at the audit recommendations and the, there are 4 aspects to that high social impact project as it stands today. One of them is that prioritized, status and review. One of them is a reduced circulation period, a reduction in securities amounts, and a more efficient agreement process where possible. And I think, I don't want to put words in the auditor's mouth, but I think the auditor has certainly not stated that we're not doing those things. What I think she has said is we can do more. I think we appreciate that, and we're happy to look at those opportunities with the Interdepartmental Housing Task Force that's been established, and look forward to bringing forward some recommendations in the coming months.
Thank you. OCH is obviously a very large developer for affordable housing, but I have small developers coming to me who want to build affordable housing, and they're not set up very well to advocate as well. But are we looking at them as well? Because OCH can't do all the projects, but there's sometimes some niche places that smaller developers can work in that are also offering affordable housing. Is there any way we can help those as well?
So all non-for-profit housing providers are, all projects from non-for-profit housing providers will be directed to our new team that has been established with housing as part of their focus. And so they will be dealing with planners that, they're eligible for the high social impact project as it stands today. And as we look at that half list and look at projects that will ultimately come forward for funding, whether it's a big developer or a small developer, they will be eligible for the same measures that we're proposing or will be proposing to committee and council in the coming months.
Great. In terms of large developers that are commercial, for-profit developers, Is it possible for us to offer incentives for them to include affordable housing, especially near transit? What have we got to offer them? Because they don't do it voluntarily, and we need that type of affordable housing as well.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The affordable housing community improvement plan will be coming to committee, Finance Corporate Services Committee at the beginning of April and then subsequently to council for approval and discussion.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So just one clarification in terms of what Councillor Kavanaugh was asking. So anyone who applies for some of the money that we have, there are going to be clear criteria that they will actually be able to deliver. I mean, Councillor Kavanaugh's point is Ottawa Community Housing does this that's all they do, right? Smaller developers may be able to do it, but there will be clear criteria that they have to be able to demonstrate a track record, proven track record of being able to build housing. They have experience in the area. There's clear criteria.
I'll start and then I'll ask Lauren Reeves to jump in. The housing services team, the affordable housing services team has been working, as you can imagine, for the last several years to build the pipeline of affordable housing. So the pipeline of affordable housing that is part of the Housing Accelerator Fund application has been one that has been built over the last several years in working with nonprofit developers, small and large. And so Lauren can talk a little bit more about who's on the list, how's the list constructed, and what is the process to fund pre-development, development, and then final construction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have we have a list of 25 projects that we have been tracking for some time. That list continues to grow. We hear from private and nonprofit housing providers weekly who are interested in consulting with us on opportunities. You will hear later in March at Planning Committee when we bring forward our Housing Accelerator Fund framework roadmap. You'll hear about the request for expression of interest, for example, that we just put out to this short list of 25 not-for-profits. And those on the list have from 8 units to 750 units in their projects. So they're all sorts, but they're all going to be measured against the same criteria in the context of their projects. So we'll look at design, of course, and the clients that they're serving. We'll look at the financial viability and the value. Some are looking at needing $200,000 per unit and some need $700,000 per unit in city funding. So we'll look at the value and correlate that with the level of affordability they're able to deliver. So those are considerations. And then finally, project readiness. We need them to get shovels in the ground as soon as possible. And that'll be weighted heavily in our evaluation. So we're just starting on those evaluations at this time, but
great. Thank you. Glad to hear that. We'll look forward to that report in March. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my assessment of the shortfall that I saw in this report from our affordability goals that were highlighted by the Auditor General, I think my read was that I think a lot of that will be addressed in due course through the process of our zoning bylaw reforms. I've heard a lot this morning about zoning bylaws, and I do want to just highlight, I suppose, the hard work that's been done by the planning team on that process. I know that that's going to start, a next phase of implementation in the next few months of public engagement and such. And I just want to confirm, one, is it fair to say that the modernization of our zoning is going to have an effect, arguably perhaps even a significant effect on our ability to develop both market rate, but most significantly for this conversation, affordable or subsidized housing? But then also, are there some innovative or perhaps some risks that we could take as a city in order to advance some of that good work from the zoning bylaw team to see, an early payoff to some of that work? Over.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. The new zoning bylaw project is a very significant piece of work. That is the primary land use regulation that we have to regulate development across the city, of course. And while the zoning bylaw cannot make housing affordable, it can certainly make housing unaffordable. So Councillor Hill's point is certainly taken with respect to that. The zoning bylaw is moving forward very aggressively within the mandate and with the understanding of the context of the times in which we're in. Looking at vastly simplifying those regulations, looking at removing the regulatory barriers that have been impeding or frustrating things, and really trying to bring us into a much more streamlined process. And that involves conveying of as of right permissions where possible, so that we lay out clearly what the expectations are, and builders, nonprofit developers, people who are looking to establish a greater supply of housing across the city, across all of the various housing sectors, will be able to rather move towards building code permits as much as possible, rather than moving their way through a regulatory process. So that is something that we will be bringing back to council over the next couple of months for that first draft. As per Councillor Hill's commentary, we will be moving on into public consultation on that first draft over the first summer. With respect to interim measures that we might be able to do, the challenge, of course, is always is that a new zoning bylaw is a huge legal instrument, very deeply interconnected. So it's very difficult to be able to extract portions of it and advance portions. It all nests together like a Russian doll. However, that is not to say that there are not things that we cannot do in the interim. Derek did touch on some of the process improvements we've been considering about site plan control, ways to further streamline or improve that where possible for some of those small developers. And also, again, to reduce some of those challenges that are existing for there. We're also looking at other means, looking at the committee of adjustment, looking at minor zoning variances, things like that, where the question is what value is that process adding to the delivery of the homes? And if there are ways to further streamline those things are pieces that the project team is looking at as being things that we might be able to advance on a much more timely basis, possibly even this year, if we are able to get concurrence through the consultation process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will just say to Councillor, all of you councillors, when you're trying to wrap your head around what he's talking about, was Nokia, right? That whole shepherding process through Krishan Walker, that is why that went so quickly. So we've done it. We know how to do it. And now for affordable housing, that this could be significant. So I keep mentioning it to you because it was unique and it was so successful. So let's hope. Councillor Hubley, I'm going to you because Councillor Carr is going at the end.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have a question to the Auditor General based on what we've just heard from staff, if that's all right. Madam Auditor General, part of your role is to try to find ways for the city to do things more effectively and more efficiently. What I've heard in a lot of these answers today and have been very bureaucratic answers. We're going to put a committee together. The committee's going to do this. We're going to study that. None of that gets housing built. And as Councillor Carr pointed out, several really good examples of how the bureaucracy at both the local level and the federal level are tying up properties that could very well be housing hundreds, if not thousands of people today. So in your role as the Auditor General, when you hear these answers, are they in line with what you expected for your report, or were you looking for something that would give us better impact right away?
No, thank you for the question. I think I hope I'm answering the question. I mean, I think we set out at the beginning that we knew that there was so much change going on. I don't know that we could have expected anything different. So there's a lot of great work happening, but there's a lot of change going on. So I think, the processes that are being put in place and responding to the changes and the improvements that are being made, are getting there, and I've heard that from management loud and clear. But I don't think we went in expecting anything different just because of the flux that is going on right now in the portfolio. I hope that answers the question.
Partially. Maybe I'll try and be even more clear. As Councillor Curry pointed out, Nokia was a great example where staff were able to work within the rules, maybe create some new rules along the way, but get something done relatively quickly that's going to deliver a lot of bang for the buck. But as Councillor Carr pointed out, with the training center since 2012, that's just been tied up in bureaucracy. So I was looking for some recommendations in the audit that might suggest ways that we can both push things through faster, but also penalize examples where things are being held up that should really be forwarded through, so that we get more building now. You know, last year I think was one of our lower numbers for getting actual permits issued out the door for new housing starts. I don't want to see that as a trend, and that you know, we're going to have all these little committees reviewing every file and taking months, if not years, to approve housing. We've got to try to find a way to get this done quickly. We've got targets for the next 10 years that each year we don't meet them means that much harder the year after. So that's what I was looking for from you. Was there any examples where you could make suggestions to council and to staff as to how to move files quicker?
Counselor, I think that's really the crux of what our report is speaking to, which is looking at what are the tools in place and how are they being utilized in order to ensure that we're minimizing delays in the process. So while we're not speaking about specific projects in general, we're speaking about the city processes. So when we make reference to that cross-functional oversight body, it really is so you can make those decisions quickly and move things through, as are all the other elements that we've brought through. So while we're not speaking, as I mentioned, about a specific project, we really are speaking to the various processes and how while we mentioned cities doing staff is doing a lot of very good work, how can we move the needle quicker?
Thank you. I'm not asking you to speak to specific projects. I was using the other councillors' examples of how things can move fast or slow. My last question then will be to you. When you looked at this and the processes and everything going on, as the Auditor General, can you say the taxpayer is getting good value for their money here?
Councillor, I wouldn't say that our audit focused on a value for money perspective when it came to these particular aspects. We really were looking at, again, the scope of and the objective of our audit was to look at whether or not the city had the tools, programs, and that framework in place in order to achieve their goals that were set out in the 10-year plan. So that was really the true focus. It wasn't a value for money audit from that perspective. So I'm not sure I could answer that question. I look to Deputy Auditor General to see if she's got anything to add to that.
I would agree with that, although obviously we set out to do certain audits as value for money audits. Just we would be probably setting ourselves up for failure to try to measure that objectively at the current moment.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a bit of a follow-up question for staff with respect to the counting of units. Several years ago, the federal government started providing funding, or maybe they had before, through CMHC, where there would be preferable financing if there was within buildings, if there was rents that were created that were geared below 30% of median household income through the CMHC. So creating affordable units within the private market developments. Are those units counted in your affordable housing count? So a private developer that's creating, 80% of AMR or whatever else.
Madam Chair, if those housing providers, private sector, have not worked with us and entered into funding contribution agreements with us, we would not be able to track the units that were delivered through a CMHC program. Typically, the nonprofit organizations, they work with us with contribution agreements. They also work with CMHC for another of their programs.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I found it quite fascinating looking at some of how that CMHC financing is working, and they incentivize people to build affordable units, but there is no mechanism for, despite getting the financing, there's no mechanism for them to have any way to guarantee that those affordable units being created within the private developments are actually going to somebody that needs an affordable unit. It's quite fascinating, actually, that the federal government created a program to incentivize people to build affordable units, and then there is no mechanism to ensure that they give that to someone who needs one. So I'm wondering if the city, I know that's out of your scope, but if they're doing anything to address that.
Madam Chair, not specifically, but what comes to mind is in April when Finance and Corporate Services Committee look at our proposed affordable housing CIP, those will be, the uptake will be from private sector developers who will deliver units at average market rent and less. They would likely also qualify for CMHC programs, but since they'd be entering into a CIP agreement with us, we would be able to track those units in that respect. So that may be a new opportunity.
Thank you very much. I think that will be very useful and help solve some of the issues that are being created by other levels of government. I just have one final question. I promise I'll get off the mic after that. Overall, within the recommendations of the audit really speak to the fact that affordable housing is really being run on a program basis and not really from a system basis, and also speaks to a lot of the lack of internal governance, which are now there's improvements made. I'm wondering, once we address these internal things, if what staff are doing to sort of also address it from an external perspective as well, because we have lots of partners in our housing and homelessness sector. And once these things are implemented internally, what is the work that we'll be doing externally?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, Housing Services works very closely with our community partners, not just community agencies, as well as housing providers that account for 52 that we have agreements with. And over the past 18 months, we've been working closely with the housing and homelessness sector organizations to come together and create an improved governance structure for the system, for system level coordination and working together on some files, especially around the 10-year plan, and assuring that we're all working together to meet the objectives of the 10-year plan. And so we will definitely, bring our work that we do internally and consult with the sector. That is a key component of anything we do in terms of policy, programs, services, enhancements or developments that we rely on the expertise of our sector, of our organizations that we work with, and we take that commitment very seriously.
Thank you for that. I think I have to get back in line because Councillor Curry, you said Councillor Carr would be last, and I see Councillor Kavanaugh has her hand up. So,
No, you're done now. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to get in a competition with Councillor Carr. Thank you. In terms of the task force, I think it's great that it's interdepartmental and we're getting together. How much are the players involved, i.e. the developers in question? Are you consulting with them? I'd hate to see a report come out that is about streamlining for them, and they say, "Wow, and it's not quite what we meant." I just want to know that there's some sort of connection with those that it affects, and who say they have things that are holding them back.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The task force is going to be very effective at breaking down, as per to Councillor Hubley's point, breaking down some of that bureaucracy and the barriers, internal barriers. And so we're very excited about that. As part of the task force terms of reference, there's an opportunity to also bring in external or stakeholders or partners who have specific interest in some of the policy development that we're accelerating. And that is in addition to, as Paul just explained, to each department actually having a consultation priority before and during development of any particular policy. So there'll be multiple areas where community partners, nonprofit developers, for instance, can actually engage with us. And as part of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan, it will also include engagement on affordable housing. And we'll look at some of the recommendations that the Auditor General has put before us today.
Great. So the stakeholders will have a chance to look at it before it's finalized. Okay, that's great to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one last very quick question, and then I'll ask if this item is received. I think this is to Isabel or Wendy. Whenever we have a federal government building that could be converted to housing or a commercial building that's converted to housing, the level of property tax we get from payment in lieu of tax is highest, commercial is next, and residential is next, right? So when we move from a federal government building where we would get that PILT, or we move from a commercial building that would then we move to residential income property tax, we get less and less revenue as a city. Where will that information come? Will that come to us at budget?
Typically, when you look at a payment in lieu of taxation, it's typically at a commercial rate, which is 2.7% in terms of the residential. So it's typically higher, yes. The city also has the benefit in terms of a payment in lieu of keeping the education portion of that tax. So we get 100% of that tax that comes through, or payment in lieu of taxation. And what happens as they get converted over time, depends on the value of the building, but typically residential, it's got that 1-to-1 rate. So it's typically lower. From a budget perspective, it really depends in terms of what our growth looks like, what's happening in the PILT world. We typically try and see those things even out over time. But I think, you know, the concern of the risk at this point, and this is what we're watching very closely, and we've talked about this as we tabled the last couple of budgets, is what's happening with our payment in lieu, knowing that the federal government wants to sell off a number of their properties. So it's a risk item in terms of our revenue is actually reducing over time.
Exactly. So I just, obviously we want lots of housing. I just think we all, in terms of siloing, we need to pay attention to that phenomena, that concept in our budget. So we will get that type of information though during our budget period, or, okay, so we can look forward to that. Good. That's a conversation this council needs to have. We have it occasionally, but we need to have it, I think, front and center based on what our federal government may be doing these days. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for that audit and for all the answers. And so generally, we ask the question, is this item received?
Received.
Received. All right. And we move on to the next item, which is the semi-annual report of follow-up procedures. Thank you very much. I mean, staff, you look like you're all staying in the audience, but those that have come for this item, thank you. If you're heading back, thank you for attending today. And I look to Joanne.
Thank you very much. A bit of a letdown, I think, but hopefully a good report. Sorry, I'll wait till the presentation comes up. Thank you. The next report we'd like to present is the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. The OAG provides a semi-annual report to the Audit Committee and City Council on the results of follow-up procedures performed on previously issued recommendations that have come due, and further highlight areas of significant risk that are still outstanding and warrant further attention by the city's administration. We last presented a report on follow-ups to recommendations to Audit Committee in June of 2023 and provided a verbal update in November of 2023. Next slide, please. This graph depicts the overall results for all 413 recommendations issued since 2019. Our primary focus for follow-ups has been on recommendations issued since 2019 and onwards, as all but 5 recommendations from prior years have been addressed. This chart includes recommendations that we assessed as part of this report in previous follow-up reports and those that we have yet to assess. The breakdown of the status of the recommendations are: the majority, being 62% of recommendations, have been closed by our office. 36% or 150 of the recommendations have not yet been assessed by our office. And the final 2% showing assessed but not yet closed represent 8 recommendations that the OAG has assessed as partially complete and which require further follow-up. Next slide, please. Since we last reported to Audit Committee in June of 2023, our office has assessed a total of 97 recommendations. This graph depicts the results of our assessment and shows that of the 97 recommendations we reviewed, 95 or 98% were closed as the issues identified had been deemed sufficiently addressed. The remaining 2% of recommendations continue to be in an open state as further follow-up by our office has been deemed warranted. Next slide, please. As noted in our earlier slide, a total of 150 of the recommendations issued since 2019 have not yet been assessed by our office. From these 150 recommendations, the city is responsible for 135. The remaining 15 are under the purview of either the Ottawa Police Services Board, Manotick Business Improvement Area, and one that our office has taken responsibility for related to ERM training. This graph depicts management's attestation as to the status of these recommendations as at December 31st, 2023. Management is reporting that 36% or 49 of the recommendations are complete, 29% or 39 are past due, and 35% or 47 are not yet due. It is important to note that these figures have not been audited by our office. Next slide, please. New this year, and in line with an Audit Committee request, we are presenting information about the aging of the overdue recommendations. As can be seen from the bar chart, a total of 45 recommendations were overdue as at December 31st, 2023. The overdue recommendations have been arranged into aging buckets based on their due dates. Of the 45 recommendations, 26 recommendations are overdue by 1 year or more. We understand that in some cases, interdependencies exist which have prevented their completion, and management has provided proposed revised target dates. These items are being monitored by our office to ensure they are completed as soon as possible for application of our follow-up procedures. Next slide, please. We have identified areas of significant risk that we believe warrant further attention. 4 of the 6 recommendations issued within the in-camera cybersecurity investigation that were due at the end of 2022 are still outstanding. Although we understand from management that work is underway to address these recommendations, we will be closely monitoring their completion as they are intended to address cybersecurity risks pertaining to a city-owned asset, which were identified in our investigation as high risk and high priority. If committee members have any questions on these recommendations, they will have to be asked in closed session. Of the 17 recommendations issued within the audit of corporate security, 7 have been past due for longer than 1 year. For the most part, these recommendations are related to the development of a corporate security framework that is estimated by management to be completed by the end of 2024. Of the 34 recommendations issued as part of the audit of facility management, 7 were due to be completed by September 2023 and are overdue. These remaining recommendations will only be completed once the service-based asset management plans are completed, which is anticipated for 2024 and 2025. Next slide, please. If it pleases the chair, we would be happy to take any questions committee members have related to this report.
Thank you very much. So quickly to the reminder that these first questions are to the Auditor General. Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Deputy Auditor General. When your office is working with staff to not only formalize an initial audit report and then allow staff to respond, whether they agree or disagree with an audit recommendation. Eventually it comes to committee here, we approve it, goes to council. It's always approved to my understanding. And then staff begin the process of implementing those audit recommendations. Throughout that entire process, can you inform this committee as to what check-ins your office does with management to ensure that they are on task and trending to complete the specific recommendation? And if a matter is raised where management isn't able to complete that recommendation to the timeline that they themselves agreed to, what happens? What's that process?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Chair, as part of our follow-up process, we work with the City Manager's Office and we get quarterly updates. So for all recommendations that have been issued, we get a status as to where they're at, whether they're 30% on their way, 70%. So that gives us a little bit of a heads up as to how they're progressing. Do they tell us they won't meet the target? deadline. That's not generally a conversation that we're having at the moment. Something that we can definitely take back to see if we can get a little bit more of a heads up from that perspective. And so as Councillor Brown, I know you're familiar with our process change from a couple of years ago, but not everybody around the table is. In the past, the Office of the Auditor General would schedule every year, they'd pick a handful of prior audits and they'd schedule follow-up audits. So that would be the approach on how the recommendations would be reviewed. A couple of years ago, when I came into office, I decided that we would focus on those that are done. There's no point in us spending a whole lot of time reviewing something that hasn't been completed yet, just for us to report they're not completed. We can do that in this forum. So as of right now, we're focusing on ensuring that those that are done are accurately implemented and that they're addressing the risks that we had identified during the initial audit. With regards to those that are late, that's the purpose of this report, is for us to highlight those two committees' attention and to raise those higher risk items. But I would say perhaps it's a point for management for them to speak to with regards to at what point are they aware that they're not going to meet a particular date that they have established. And I guess I could also add to it that there's usually a discussion back and forth when it comes to a management response. If we have concerns on how long something might take, we'll highlight to them that we do have that concern. Sometimes there's modifications that are made. Sometimes there's two stages of a recommendation that can be implemented in order for us to see that there is adequate progression and that we don't get concerned that things are falling too far behind.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I missed a step and that our city manager was going to present as well, so that you'll have more information and then you're still on the list. So I'll go to the city manager for a response, which I told you was coming and then I skipped over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, committee members. Do appreciate the opportunity just to speak to and provide an update with respect to the outstanding recommendations. You can move to the next slide, please. So as per Vice Chair Brown's motion at the last audit committee meeting, staff are here to speak to those high-risk audit recommendations specifically that were identified by the Auditor General. And I believe in the Auditor General semi-annual report on the follow-up procedures before you today, it acknowledges that we have made some significant progress in implementing and advancing these recommendations, and I'm pleased to see that. Management very much appreciates the work of the Auditor General's office, and we remain committed to advancing all of the outstanding recommendations. And I know we talked about this a little bit at the last audit committee about the COVID and the impact of the COVID pandemic that it had on our organization, and that, you know, society has largely moved on from that. But the fact remains that COVID has had both an immediate and a prolonged effect when it arrived in our community in March of 2020. You know, you've heard about the things that we did at the time. We had to redirect staff, responding to critical community needs, supporting Ottawa public health. We had to look at cost containment measures to make it through and see it through the end, as well as constantly standing down and standing back up our city services. And, you know, given the duration, it had an ongoing impact in terms of the work that we were doing with respect to our audit recommendations and seeing them through to full implementation. But I think there's other important context here too, and I want to talk a little bit about this morning. And it's really that prolonged impact that it's had in terms of carrying out some of these things. And some of the key activities that we wanted to accomplish during that time had to be paused for various reasons, and COVID had an impact on that. And I just want to give a couple of examples in terms of that context. So we think about our ability to complete the work on our long-range financial plans. And I'm just going to take transit as an example. What's key is good and reliable data that's going to show us what our ridership's going to be. And I look back to what happened during COVID. Our ridership tanked. We're just kind of getting back. We're not where we need to be, but we're getting data now in terms of being able to build those projections out over the next 10 and 30 years. So major changes and major impacts. I look at the impact that the city had on its origin destination survey. You think about traffic patterns during COVID and how they changed significantly. The use and data was not normal in terms of gathering a baseline. When we turn to our partners, we talk to MTO, we talk to the MTQ, Gatineau, STO, and we agreed that it would not be relevant if we collected that data during COVID and that we had to pause that work. So we've reinitiated it. It's great. We've got a survey result in. We're doing that analysis now, and it's all underway. Additionally, council's aware, you've been advised of the changes in legislation with respect to the asset management classifications. And again, that's had a direct impact in terms of the facility management audit recommendations. So I just think that context is important in terms of talking about what's happening with respect to the completion of the audit recommendations. So you understand sort of the context and the environment that we're working with in. But despite that, we are committed and we're working on the recommendations. And I think virtually all of the outstanding recommendations that are a significant risk that were spoken about today are 75, 85, 95% complete. So really great progress in terms of that. You can turn to the next slide, please. So I have a couple of staff here with me to speak to the outstanding audit recommendations that have been highlighted as high risk from the June 2023 report. And we're going to talk about those this morning. And the last written semi-annual report on follow-up procedures, which is in June, identified 7 areas of high risk and a total of 27 past due recommendations. You can move to the next slide, please, which is slide 4. On those recommendations, I'm really pleased to report that 9 are now complete, and 3 of the high-risk audits are also complete. And that includes our frozen services and hydrant management maintenance, which is through Public Works, our fire suppression audit from Ottawa Fire Services, and our contract management also through Public Works. You can move to the next slide, please. We're making progress, and we are committed to completing the work associated with each recommendation. And I think you're going to hear me say that several times this morning. The 2 areas identified as high risk from June 23 is the city estimates and Meridian Theaters at Centrepoint Shakeman Arts Theatre. They're no longer high risk, so they've been taken off that list. For city estimates, 8 of the 13 recommendations are complete. We have some ongoing delays there, which are really, factors outside of our control. And it really has to do, again, in terms of the impact of the pandemic and looking at, those studies that I talked about and the key transit metrics as an example, as well as the city's origin and destination survey, and making sure that we have good data to be able to complete those. When we look at the theater audit, 11 of the 14 recommendations are complete. And the delays in terms of the theater audit are really a result of pandemic-related closures in the theater industry. And one of the outstanding recommendations is going to be completed in this quarter. And we have 2 recommendations that are planned to be completed in Q3 of this year. You can move to the next slide, please. So in the follow-up report that's been submitted by the Auditor General today, there are still some areas of high risk that are identified, and these are the ones that we want to speak to this morning. And I've invited staff here that have oversight of those audits to speak to them. To my left, we have Beth Gooding. She's the Director of Public Safety Service. She's going to give you more information in terms of the audit on corporate security. And Den Shenyu to my right, our General Manager of Recreation, Culture and Facility Services, is here to provide more information with respect to the facility management audit. And as committee members are aware, should there be any questions regarding the cybersecurity audit investigation, those will be need to address in camera, or we're happy to take them offline and answer any questions that you may have. So Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you to speak to your audit. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to come and provide a direct update on the progress against the outstanding corporate security audit recommendations. You know, in 2019, when the corporate security audit was brought to committee and council, it represented a significant work package for us. It had 17 recommendations. We're a relatively small team. And so our strategy was always to prioritize those recommendations that represented an operational risk to the city. And so we did things like augment security systems around our, as required, around our cash handling areas. We also enhanced our photo identification and access control functions, which are key components of any physical security program. And really what's left now is recommendations that are largely tied, as the Auditor General mentioned during their briefing, to the development of a new overarching physical security policy for the city. Next slide. So if you look at this slide, this is the second bullet, and we're calling this yeah, next slide. Yep. So we're calling this a corporate security framework. And I think this is where we very respectfully agree to disagree with a little bit with the Auditor General in terms of the timing, because we found that finalizing this corporate security framework in 2024 has been very beneficial for us. It's enabled us to develop it in the post-pandemic threat and risk security context, which is really important. It's also enabled us to leverage some of the research programs and tools that have been developed by the city over the past couple of years related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're integrating that into our policy. And we wanted to make sure we did a really robust job in terms of setting the right background. And so we've been able to complete comprehensive benchmarking exercises, security standards reviews, and also an academic literature review. So we're really excited about the development of this document. It's tracking very fast to completion, and we expect it to be closed out in the next 6 months at the most. Thanks.
Chair, speaking to the facility management audit, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the 34 recommendations in this audit really caused us to have an in-depth look at all aspects of facility management in multiple departments. And to acknowledge the work of the team that came together, the interdepartmental team that came together to, first of all, complete the 26 recommendations. And I can assure you that within that work, there's been a careful look at governance of facility management within the city and the creation of some governance bodies, a steering committee and a tactical committee, to make sure that the work that we do is now done in a formal way and is with an awareness of what every department is doing. And with special attention, the auditor, as part of the audit, drew some attention to the need for more coordination between preventative work that facility management does and a more corrective work that goes on. And what we've spent a lot of time in doing is creating the tools that we require to make sure that when money's spent, it's spent well and that it's value for money, and that it's spent in as timely a manner as possible. So good work there. Of the 7 recommendations that are not completed, a critical piece of doing finishing up these recommendations is understanding the current state of our assets, the gap between the work that needs to be done to return those assets to serviceable conditions, as well as our future needs with respect to our assets. And most of that work will be done through asset management plans. The original deadlines that were set for this by the province were for 2023, but with the pandemic, it was realized that the rather prescriptive and detailed requirements, both in terms of documenting current state of assets, but also projecting out what our needs are going to be, will take longer. And so the province has extended the deadline. We will have, I believe council's already seen the asset management plans for the 4 core areas that have been developed. And by July of this year, we'll see the non-core current state, and by next year we'll see the projection out. So good work is being done there and progress is being made, but it does not allow us to complete at this time a very accurate projection of the gap, the cost of that gap, and the look into the future. As an interim measure, we have looked at developing other tools to make sure that we are looking at current state of asset and beginning to address those. And already you're seeing recommendations that are coming out of that, for example, that relate to our service review and the rationalization of facilities and taking facilities offline when they are at end of life. We've also developed and will be approving shortly a policy to look at those things. So we're starting to put structure around those things. Of the 6 that are service asset management related, we believe 4 of them will extend into 2025. We believe that 2 of them will likely be completed this year, and that is, I believe, a good thing for the city. The 7th recommendation really focused on prioritizing tools, the tools that we require in terms of service agreements between departments. And because there was a reorganization of water services and infrastructure services, those service agreements had to be held off until we understood the responsibilities of each of those units. So again, we believe that in short order, by Q1 of this year, with the knowledge of what the new departments are going and responsibilities will be, that we will get those done. So some of them will lapse into 2025 based on the service amps, but others will be done this year. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Can you move to the last slide, please? I just want to conclude by highlighting the progress on all audit recommendations. And when I say that, I talk about all of the audit recommendations from 2015 to 2023. And in that time, we've had 667 audit recommendations that have been made to management. And 620 of those, or 93% of the audit recommendations, have been implemented or they're tracking on time. And, despite our progress, I can say that myself and the senior leadership team share the Auditor General's view that there is still very important work to do here on our past due recommendations. And I want to assure you today that that work will be done and we will get it completed as soon as possible. Thank you very much. And that's the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much for that fulsome response. That was, I think, very helpful and warranted, really, because, the idea is that these are closed. But there are sometimes reasons why they're not. Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to the city manager and her team. I appreciate the in-depth explanation. I know I've outlined some of my concerns in the past, and I guess the foundation of my concern isn't so much that things go over, because life happens and we have to have that ability to change and adapt. I guess my concern runs along the lines that the recommendations are, I believe, always agreed to by management. And when it's management saying, yes, we can implement this audit recommendation, and I know the city manager's office and city staff provide an estimated timeline that they believe they can work within. When you blow by those deadlines, those were I guess, self-assessed and self-imposed deadlines that committee and council accepted. I guess I'll start at the back end. It was the last question I wrote down here. in the city manager's presentation, you've indicated that from 2015 to, I guess now, all of those audit recommendations that have been recommended and accepted, 93% have been implemented or are tracking to be on time. COVID didn't happen until 2020. So from 2015 to 2020, that's 5 years. Do we have that many recommendations that took 5 years to implement and then COVID delayed them further?
No, that was basically a broader picture in terms of overall context with respect to audit recommendations here that have been given to management. And I think it's important. I mean, COVID, I hate talking about it, but it is important context in terms of what it did to the organization. I'm not suggesting that we haven't missed a timeline pre-COVID. Sometimes there are things that do happen between, I'm going to say, the dialogue and the actual audit that comes to audit committee with respect to changes. One of those that we spoke about this morning is a change in legislation that happens that kind of gets in the way of what we want to do. I think sometimes, and I think my colleague Beth spoke to it quite well, we've got lessons learned that came out of COVID, and I suspect lessons learned that came out of the convoy as well that are going to give us a better implementation of the management response as a result of that. So as much as that time might be elongated, I think we're going to have a better result.
Thank you very much for that. And I guess from your perspective through the audit process, my understanding is, the Auditor General's team will come to management and say, this is what we found. These are the recommendations we're going to make. Like it is a significant length of time that elapses by the time the report ends up here. And as we found out in the last item that we've just gone through on the agenda, work doesn't start when it's approved by committee and council. It can start prior. And we've heard that the internal working group for the affordable housing piece has already started. So there seems to be a lot of lead time and a lot of process time. And then we still seem to go over. If you can, the last question for me, I promise I'll yield the floor to my other colleagues. But where does the buck stop? And ultimately, who's responsible when an audit recommendation doesn't get completed by the time that staff have agreed to? Who ultimately is responsible? Because I know at the end of the day, we are responsible up here, committee and council. So who on staff side is ultimately responsible? Thank you very much.
I would suggest the buck stops with myself. We do have departmental leads that have oversight of the recommendations, and they'll lead the recommendations. You've heard my colleagues sitting here at the table talk about the recommendations, where they're at, some of the challenges that they've had. And as much as I don't like it, sometimes there are delays and they are beyond our control. But we are trying to be open and transparent with committee and council in terms of those delays. And that's why we're here today. And we're always happy to talk about it. I track audit recommendations every quarter in my office throughout the organization to see where we're at, see what those delays are. And those discussions happen with each of the leads as well.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that you came here today, City Manager. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the Auditor General. Can you explain how the backlog compares year over year? I.e., is this a typical year or is this an aberration?
Thank you for the question. In terms of the past due recommendations, we've reported in this as of December 31st, it was 39, and it compares to 50 at this time last year.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate that you're on top of everything to our city manager. Probably the one that concerns me most, probably concerns most people, is cybersecurity. And I just want some reassurance that we're not vulnerable. I was just noting that my relatives down in Hamilton had a recent cyber attack. And it shut down like the library system, a whole bunch of things. And these are big concerns. So I just think we need reassuring that that things are moving forward.
What I can say is that these are a top priority for us. You've heard that we are in the process of engaging a CISO here at the city. We're very excited about that new resource joining us because that's going to help us accelerate the work in this area.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. We just have to receive this report. So in terms of the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures, is this item received?
Received.
Now, one of the things we didn't say, we'll have to go back to 5.1 for the audit of the affordable housing. I actually had to ask if it was received and carried. Is it received and carried?
Received and carried.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. And so our next item is the 2023 annual report. And I look to, no, that's not our next item. Honest to goodness.
She needs them in French next time.
Chair, it would be the 2023 report on the fraud and waste.
Okay. See my glasses? I'm reading a book right now called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. Can you tell I'm reading the book? All right. So never mind. We are now on the 2023 report on the fraud and waste hotline. And I will get new glasses.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Nous souhaitons maintenant vous présenter le rapport de 2023 sur la ligne directe de fraude et d'abus. Je vais maintenant céder la parole à Sarah Parr, directrice principale responsable de la vérification. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Natalie. Since 2005, the Office of the Auditor General has administered the city's fraud and waste hotline. The primary objective of the program is to provide a means for employees and the public to confidentially and anonymously report activities or conduct related to or involving city personnel, resources, operations, or vendors for which they suspect involve fraud or waste. The policy applies to all city employees except for city councilors and their office staff, Ottawa Police Service and its board, Ottawa Public Library, Ottawa Public Health, and Ottawa Community Housing Corporation. When an allegation is received through the hotline, which is administered by an independent third party, our office first assesses the allegation's merit and determines whether management or our office is best suited to complete the investigation. Management investigates those reports provided by our office and informs us of the outcome of their investigation, as well as any remedial action to be taken and any related discipline. The OAG provides independent oversight of management's investigations, as well as assesses the adequacy of future mitigation measures and sufficiency of management's corrective actions to diminish or prevent future risks. The results of this work are aggregated into our report. For allegations investigated and substantiated by our office, a management letter may be issued, or an investigation report may be produced and presented to committee and council. As part of the Office of the Auditor General's commitment to continuous improvement, we will be working with the City Manager's Office as the owner of the program to conduct a review of both the program and the policy. Following this review, we will develop an awareness campaign and related activities to increase awareness among employees and residents of the city about the program and its intended purpose. Next slide, please. In 2023, we received a total of 282 reports. This marks a 34% increase from 2022 and an 11% average annual growth rate from 2019 to 2023. Also in 2023, the OAG observed an increase in reports containing multiple allegations. That is, reports containing more than one incident or act to investigate. Reports with multiple allegations generally take more time to assess, action, and investigate. This resulted in an increased demand on fraud and waste hotline resources this past year. The 282 reports received during the year contained a total of 355 allegations. Next slide, please. Of the reports we received in 2023, 62% were made by employees and 38% came from members of the public. This is consistent with previous years. Reports are filed through a variety of methods, including the Integrity Accounts web portal, by phone to the hotline or to the Office of the Auditor General, or by email or even by mail to the Office of the Auditor General. Consistent with prior years, the most common method of reporting instances of fraud or waste was by using the web portal. 77% of reports came through Integrity Accounts, followed by 14% of reports which were made by phone to the Office of the Auditor General or to the hotline. Next slide, please. This year, we began tracking reports by department. The departments that received the most reports included transit services, emergency and protective services, including bylaw, paramedic services, and fire services, as well as public works. Combined, these three departments received 59% of all cases in 2023. Next slide, please. This slide depicts the results of all reports closed in 2023. Outcomes are categorized as follows. Substantiated reports include one or more allegations that were found to be accurate and that constituted fraud or waste. Accurate but compliant reports include one or more allegations found to be accurate but that did not constitute fraud or waste. Inaccurate reports include one or more allegations found to be inaccurate. Reports with insufficient information to conclude are reports with insufficient evidence to support all allegations included in the report or with insufficient evidence to reach a conclusion. Allegations classified as not applicable are not applicable under the city's fraud and waste policy, such as city services that are not under the Office of the Auditor General's jurisdiction, as I mentioned previously, Ottawa Police Service or Ottawa Community Housing as examples. Cases that are not related to city services, for example, reports from residents about credit card fraud, or cases that are not a fraud or waste issue, for example, a legitimate complaint that could have been made to 311, for example, an issue with garbage pickup. Reports classified as insufficient information to investigate are unclear and or lack the information needed to perform an investigation. While we always go back to the reporter to obtain additional information, the reporter may not respond or may not have any additional information to provide. Allegations classified as not applicable. Finally, reports classified as consideration for future audit planning include allegations that are taken into consideration as part of the OAG's risk-based audit planning process. During 2023, we closed a total of 282 reports, of which 118 were investigated. Of the reports investigated, 54 were substantiated, 20 were accurate but compliant, 38 were inaccurate, and 6 did not contain sufficient information to conclude. For the substantiated cases, corrective actions included, but were not limited to, suspension, both paid and unpaid, increased performance management, letters of expectation, and verbal warnings. It is important to note where reports are found to be substantiated, any disciplinary action that is taken is the responsibility of management. Next slide, please. Last year, the Office of the Auditor General conducted several larger investigations that resulted in reports tabled at the Audit Committee, including investigation of allegations related to planning activities for the Conservancy development, investigations in particular of Manotick Business Improvement Area expenses, and the investigation of allegations related to Carlton Lodge long-term care home. In addition to these investigations, the Office of the Auditor General conducted 2 investigations that were not the subject of reports, a second investigation related to long-term care, and an investigation into the use of city resources and equipment. These investigations have led to policy revisions, strengthened controls, and disciplinary actions. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation. We would be happy to take any questions or comments the committee may have related to the Fraud and Waste Annual Report.
Thank you for that. So the first will be questions to the Auditor General. If people have any questions. I don't see any questions. Councillor Lowe.
Thanks, Chair. So something came to mind as the presentation was going. Last year, I think, I believe it was last year, where you had received like I think a total of 1,000 something calls, or I don't remember if there was reports or complaints, but and then a bunch of them was just shipped off because they were things that could be handled at the management level. Did that happen again this year?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Chair, I believe what you're referring to is the frequent number of similar nature cases that we had with regards to OC Transpo. And so you may recall that last June, I made a statement to committee that I felt that those cases that were coming in were bordering on abuse of the fraud and waste hotline, and that we would no longer be intaking those. What I can state is at that time and point, that very day, those reports ceased to come in. And we reported in our annual report that I believe 955 cases had been received from January 1st until June 9th of 2023. So you can imagine had that continued, what that number would have looked like for the rest of the year. and unfortunately, I'm about to say something that's a surprise to management, so I apologize. I had the chance to brief the general manager of transit. Unfortunately, those did recommence again a couple of weeks ago. And so we are taking a look at those. I have been speaking with the general manager of transit with regards to the best approach to manage those particular items.
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Thank you very much. I'm curious, when in the category of not applicable, can you say where they were directed to, but they weren't applicable? Like, were they mostly going to a certain department?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. It is a range, a complete range. So as Sarah had mentioned during the presentation, there are many that are just outside of our purview, whether it's, Ottawa Police Service, Ottawa Community Housing Corporation, which are not within our purview. It could be garbage pickup. There's other avenues in which some of these complaints are better directed that really do not constitute fraud or waste. And so from that perspective, what we're going to be looking to do, especially when we have our awareness campaign later in the next year or two, will be to educate both employees and members of the public on where the best avenue is based off of the type of complaint. I'm working with the city manager's office. They've shared a great list that they have put together as to the best place to direct individuals. Councillor Kavanaugh, you may recall last time we spoke about this, you had a request as to whether or not we can come up with an appropriate list and ensure that we're directing everybody to the right location and not having them bounce back. And so that is something that we're still working on and that will be circulating shortly.
I appreciate that, because I think councillors' offices could use a cheat sheet, particularly when we're the ones that get the calls. So I appreciate that. In terms of our OC Transpo, and I'll ask them, but we recently heard in the news about the speed cameras. Was that covered under your in the fraud and waste hotline about not getting ticketed?
With regards to those that are substantiated, I'm trying to quickly go through the substantiated cases. I do not believe that any did come through in 2023 with regards to speeding.
It didn't? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So any questions for staff on this or just for the Auditor General? No? Okay, so the report recommendation is that the Audit Committee recommend Council receive the 2023 report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Is this item received?
Received.
Received. Thank you. So now item 5.4, Office of the Auditor General 2023 Annual Report.
Merci, Madame la Présidente et chers membres du Comité de la vérification. I'll wait for the presentation to be shared. Je suis très heureuse de déposer mon 3e rapport annuel. Ce rapport fait état des réalisations et des travaux du Bureau de la vérificatrice générale en 2023. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Au nom du Bureau de la vérificatrice générale, je tiens à exprimer ma gratitude au Bureau de la directrice municipale, à la direction et aux membres du personnel pour leur fidèle collaboration et leur aide soutenue. Je tiens aussi à remercier mon équipe pour tous leurs efforts consacrés qui ont abouti à des rapports percutants. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Dans l'exposé que nous allons vous présenter aujourd'hui, nous vous donnerons une vue d'ensemble de notre rapport annuel. Il sera surtout question des travaux que nous avons réalisés en 2023, de la gestion du rendement et d'un récapitulatif du leadership du BVG dans la communauté du secteur de l'audit. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. In 2023, our office issued a total of 13 reports, 9 audit reports, as well as 4 investigation reports. While I won't name all of them to you, some of the key reports included 3 with respect to the responses to the convoy protest, 2 forming part of our agile audit of the zero emissions buses project, as well as 2 touching upon cybersecurity. The volume of reports issued this past year was significantly higher than in 2022, representing an 86% increase. This increase is attributable to several factors, including efficiencies that we have introduced into our audit processes. From these reports, our office issued a total of 99 recommendations, of which all were accepted by management. In addition to these audits and investigations, we also performed follow-up procedures on 108 recommendations. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. We've established performance metrics in order to help us understand how we are performing. I'd like to walk you through a few of our key performance indicators. Our office completed and reported on 100% of our planned audits and projects, with the exception of the Audit of Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Plan. We decided not to commence this particular audit as management was undergoing an external evaluation in this area. Once the assessment has been completed, our intention is to review the results of that assessment and determine whether or not there are any further areas for us to add value. Next, I'd like to speak a little bit to our budget. Always a good news story from this perspective. Due to some staff vacancies, we were able to save obviously some costs, as well as a timing difference with our commencement of the Agile Audit of Lansdowne 2.0 redevelopment. Our office was significantly under budget in 2023, so hoping that that was utilized in other areas of the city. And I'd also like to touch upon our continuing education requirements. So OAG staff are required to complete development training to enhance both their skill sets as well as to comply with requirements of the various professional bodies that we are assigned to. I'm happy to state that all staff have met this requirement for 2023. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Over the next 2 slides, I'd like to walk you through the results of various surveys that we have completed. As part of our quality assurance process, we issue surveys to all of our audit clients after we've completed each audit. The survey results have indicated that audit clients either agreed or strongly agreed that our audits were relevant, that recommendations were constructive and actionable, and that our reports were objectively and clearly written. While all results are generally positive, the one area that we took from with regards to where we can continue to improve on is how we demonstrate the value in the work that we are conducting. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Last year, as I'm sure everyone around this table knows, we conducted an annual survey among council members. This survey was aimed at better understanding the impact of our work and the perspective of members of council on the steps that we're taking to execute our mandate. The majority of respondents believed that our office had a good understanding of council priorities, that we help the city attain its strategic objectives, and furthermore, that we support council in ensuring that it both holds itself and the administration accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds, as well as value for money in municipal operations. Some respondents felt, however, that the OAG work only sometimes results in improved governance, risk management, and control processes. So if we look at the combination of both the audit surveys as well as the council surveys, we've obviously noted that the one area that we can continue to work on is how we demonstrate the value that we bring. And that is usually achieved through how we are improving and leading to improved governance, risk management, and control processes. So we're looking at various ways on how we can do that, but we will ensure that we articulate this more clearly in our audit reports so that all stakeholders can get a clear understanding of this. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Each year, our office contributes in various ways to the audit profession. We've got a few here on the slide, and I'll walk you through a couple. This past year, on this exact day, on International Women's Day, I had the pleasure of joining the Auditor General of Canada, the Auditor General of Quebec, and the Auditor General of La Ville de Montréal in a panel discussion conducted through the Canada School of Public Service, sharing our respective journeys as women in top audit leadership positions. I'd also like to highlight that this past October, as an audit leader in implementing agile auditing in the public sector, we presented our approach and results of our Agile Audit of the Zero Emissions Buses project to auditors across Canada at the Institute of Internal Auditors National Conference that was held here in Ottawa last year. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. This concludes our presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions members of committee have. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That is a lot of work in 1 year. A lot of heavy duty audits, a lot of audits with high profile, high media profile. and a lot of success that has come out of that. So thank you very much. It's nice to see that all laid out. You know, we do it meeting by meeting, but when you put it all together, it's beyond impressive. So thank you so much for that report. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to the whole Auditor General team on your work on prevention of workplace violence and harassment on this day of International Women's Day. I really appreciated that. People think that Auditor Generals are all about bean counting, but it's also about preserving the integrity of our system and protecting vulnerable people, and including our staff. And I really appreciate that. And I thought this is a time to give a shout out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, just a comment of gratitude. I think this is a well-functioning office. Your staff are always responsive. It's a lot of work, and I can't profess to understand all of it all the time, but your team does a very good job at explaining what we're reading and what we're looking at and what we're supposed to examine. I think for the cost of a cup of coffee for every resident in Ottawa, there's tremendous value here. My only question, is there something more that you could do if you had additional resources, or is there something that we could change? Certainly you can do more.
More resources?
Absolutely. But is there something that we could do on this committee to help improve your function, or is everything going pretty well?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. It's a little bit of a catch-22, and I know I've probably said this a few times at committee. Of course, we can always use more resources. There's so much work that we can do. It is so difficult putting together an audit plan because it's taking things off of a list that we know would benefit from us reviewing it. That being said, we always balance the work that we do with obviously the funds that the city has and the very important programs and services that the municipality is required to deliver. And so, yes, by all means, if you find a magical pot, I'd like to be the first person that can put my hand into it. But I don't think there is such a pot. So.
All right, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I noted that when you mentioned that you were significantly under budget for last year, one of the reasons was the vacancies that are in your department. How much of an effect did those vacancies have on like the ability to meet deadlines and whatever? Like, was there extra pressure? I know like all that work's been done, but what did you feel like there was extra pressure? Was there overtime that had to be doled out or something?
It's a great question. And yes, of course, with staff leaving, it does put additional pressure. I'm looking at the two lovely ladies that are sitting next to me. They took on an extra large burden. Everyone in the team did. We have a lot of new staff. We're a small team, so by nature, it's going to have a turnover. There's only so much room for movement. We lost one of our audit principals. She had great promotion that she was offered. I'm always encouraged that we're able to help people grow and that they're able to continue in their career when we're not able to necessarily offer them a position here in the office. Obviously, there's other opportunities within the city, just not always within our office. So yes, of course, additional pressures. So while you see that significant increase in the work that we accomplished, it's even of greater magnitude knowing that we were short-staffed. We had, I'd say, an average of 3 vacancies throughout the year. We had new positions created that we haven't yet filled. As I'm sure it's not a secret, the market, it's definitely an employee's market still. It's not an employer's market. So it's difficult to find staff at a certain level and to have them come and join our team. I'm happy to say we just got a list of some potential candidates for one of our posters that I'm looking forward that we'll be able to continue to fill our team with. So
great, looking forward to that. That sort of relieving some of the pressure for you and your team there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will just highlight that, Vice Chair Brown and I, it's a different thing when you're the chair and the vice chair of a committee, because you do learn more maybe than you would as a committee member. And I think that applies to every committee. Of course you would. But one of the things we talked a little bit about with the Auditor General was, and people have asked me this, why is it that there's never a report that comes back that staff did not agree with this recommendation? They always agree with the recommendations. But the reason why they agree with the recommendations is because there's so much work that goes on in the background with the Auditor General asking staff, is there anything we didn't understand here? So you don't want to put forward a recommendation where staff say, you know what, you don't understand this at all, right? So, we see the final report here, but what goes on behind the scenes before the report is read is a tremendous amount of work. And you do want to look at what other audits you can do and what you have time to do, but it's also a ton of work for our staff, every audit you do. But just if you really truly understood how much time goes into these audits, they're of great value to us. Knowing that they're not just recommendations on a page, there's a ton of back and forth behind the scenes to make sure that the Auditor General is perfectly clear and they understand what is going on at the city. So I really appreciate that from you and your whole team, because that's not always the way with an Auditor General. It's not always the way with an Auditor General's team. There is a level of power to say, listen, we're going to give you a recommendation whether you like it or not. And that isn't the attitude. Obviously, if you have to, you have to, but it's nice to know, as Vice Chair Brown and I can, how much is actually going on behind the scenes prior to all this work. So thank you very, very much. So our recommendation here is that the Audit Committee recommend Council receive the 2023 annual report. Is this item received?
Received.
All right. In-camera items, I see that there are none. Notices of motion? Any notices of motion?
Motion that you need to wear your glasses.
I know that I need to get new glasses. Somebody got one of those. Inquiries, are there any inquiries? No? I'm not sitting beside Marty Carr in the next meeting, just so you know, when we're putting out the name tags. And is there any other business? No? Well, we are adjourned until June the 10th, and stay tuned for more information on Audit Committee meetings in June. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Chair.